Hey everyone, you're listening to the Active Turnkey podcast, a podcast designed for hands-off, passive real estate rental investors. In the Active Turnkey podcast, you'll hear Tom Olson and Jared Stoltmeister discuss all things turnkey rentals with other turnkey providers, service providers, and rental investors. Our goal is to help you reach your financial freedom and whatever comes after that. Let's go. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Active Turnkey podcast. I'm your host, Jared Stoltmeister.
And I'm Tom.
And he's Tom. He beat me to it. That's the first time.
Yeah, I got him.
In how many episodes?
I don't know, like a lot, millions of episodes.
Well, he has been in a lot of podcasts.
Millions.
And that's how many cuts we've had. Because
do we need to cut and start over, Jared? Or are you good?
No,
have I
no
thrown
more
you
cuts.
off your game?
We've had millions. So
okay,
we need to continue. This is Tom Olson, like he said. He knows his name. And we're back here, Active Turnkey Podcast. And so we have another...
The best way to buy rentals.
The best way to buy rentals. That's not your cue.
I think I'm off my game today.
He is, but that's okay. It's early, and we'll see if we can get back.
All right, we're gonna pull it back up on the rails, and we're gonna get going on this podcast.
Yeah, once we
today.
get going, though, you're gonna do great.
We're gonna do great.
So today's topic is what to look for in a turnkey rental property.
Oh, that's a good topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We haven't talked about this yet.
We've kind of beat around the bush with certain things. And so now
it's time to just stop beating around the bush.
Jared. Yeah, we're going to hit it. We're just going to go right at it.
This is what you look for when you're buying a turnkey rental property.
Correct. Now, we have done, how to read a pro forma.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a factor in doing it, but we're going to go to the property today.
Yeah, because there's an emotional aspect in this. So
definitely.
There ought to be some logical part, and that's kind of where the pro forma comes in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But there ought to also be an emotional part of this decision because, whether or not you like it or not, this is still an emotional decision for somebody at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you buy a property, you sell a property, like a lot of people will say, I always want to sell the woman. I don't really want to sell the man because the man doesn't really care. As long as he has his garage or he might have his couple things, his man cave or whatever it is. He might want a garage or he might want a backyard or something to that point. But a lot of times what you really want in a house is like what will sell the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important. I think sometimes people get off track when they're thinking about rentals because they only look at the pro forma and they don't really look at everything else that's going on, or they only look at what else is going on and they don't look at the pro forma and they don't look at their numbers. So I think you gotta put both together.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting you say that because when I first started investing, I remember talking to working with you, one investor. I was selling a house in Valpo. The numbers were great. They liked the numbers. They liked the house, but they didn't like there weren't flowers in the flower bed. No flowers. And I remember thinking, that's so simple. You can just put flowers in there and you're done, right?
That's interesting. I have never heard that.
I know.
I
really
would not
surprised.
buy or not buy a house whether if they had flowers. You know why? Because you could add the flowers.
That's what I told her. I'm like, you can do it at any time. You can pick your flowers. And I remember thinking that's so simple to the point where when I bought my first rental and we did our first rehab on a house, my wife did the same thing. Oh, we can do flowers. I'm like, honey, it doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Where now...
But it could be a big deal.
But it could be. You're absolutely right.
And it doesn't cost very much to put flowers in.
I have graduated to the idea that no, you don't have to have all these stones and all this stuff.
Graduated.
I have. I've grown.
Stepping up
I'm
his
more
game.
mature now. And in that approach, that stuff matters.
Well, I don't think that this podcast is going to be so detailed as to the flowers.
It's not. It's an illustration.
It is a good illustration. Correct. Because you're absolutely right. Like when, it's funny because I own vacation rentals. And there's one particular vacation rental that for the last year we haven't put. There's 4 planters in the front, in the windows. There's 4 window planters, and for the last year we have forgotten. Well, part of it's been COVID. I think we have a little bit of an excuse this year with everything. Mm-hmm. We just blame everything on COVID, right? But for us, we haven't put anything in those planters this year. And every time I go up to that house, I'm like, oh.
Yeah,
we gotta put some flowers or something in those planters. So that's true. And I think it was the planters that they were looking for. Were there planters?
Well, at this one it was just on the ground, but just simple. But I remember for her it was a sticking point, and I was thinking, like you said, this is not a decision not to buy a rental property for flowers. I mean, it's like what, $100, and you can have an amazing flower bed. But I digress. But the point being that it mattered to her. And it is something that you should pay attention to. How much that depends on you. But today's podcast is going to be more about the property itself. And so now backing up, we did want to discuss a few things. First of all, this is not about a market. You've already identified that. At this point, if you want to kind of get an idea of where you are in the process, you've identified a market, you've identified your property manager. Now you're trying to get a deal. Okay, and then a deal comes your way, you analyze the pro forma, the data does work out or doesn't work out, but at this point you're like, okay, that's the next step. Let's start talking about the house. Let's start talking about the area, the things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about today, more or less.
Awesome.
So what do you think of, Tom? Like right at the top, I mean, we have several different things or basic things, but what do you think about?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned flowers because the first thing I would tell you to think about is curb appeal.
There you go.
So like if flowers add curb appeal, or if it makes a big difference, well, then it might be something that you might want. But really, you have to understand that if it's going to be a good rental, like people make the same emotional decision as a rental, whether if somebody's going to buy a property. So, a lot of times people spend all this money on flipping houses and they're not willing to spend even, half of that money doing a rental. I hear so many gurus and so many people out there saying, like, I have a whole rental rehab budget and I have a whole fix and flip rehab budget. And I'm like, okay, to a certain degree, I understand that.
Sure.
But for us, ours aren't much different.
Sure.
The basic bones are pretty much the same for our rentals and for our fix and flips. There's not a lot of difference in the main basics of it. Now, some of the aesthetics, there might be a little bit of a difference in, and maybe a different grade in quality of finishes or a different grade in, little extra things that you can do to make things pop. But I do think that curb appeal is one of those things that you should probably look at. I think the area as well. So like you may not want houses in that D minus area. And I think it's totally understandable. I think as an investor looking long term, I like those areas if I think they're going to move into a C class area, or if I think the C class area is going to move into a B class area, or if a neighborhood is on the way up, like that's when you want to buy, right? I mean, it doesn't matter where it's at. Like if it's graduating up, or if prices are going up in value, from an investment standpoint, to me, I personally am looking for those areas that I think are going to change over the next couple of years. So I do think area is important, and it is something that I think is very, it's valid. And I also think it has to do with your long-term strategy, because so if your long-term strategy is to hold on to this thing for, at least 5 years, 10 years, like I think knowing those areas and kind of trying to figure out those areas is a really big deal. For us, like I'm pretty targeted in specific areas, even in Gary, Indiana, which a lot of Gary is DC area. I'm very targeted in certain areas because I believe in certain areas. I think certain areas are going to go up in value. If you notice, I'm not really pushing, houses in those B plus areas right now, like I was 5, 6, 7 years ago, because like those areas I don't think have much more runway to go up in value. Now they might be still good returns, and people might still be happy with those, and we might be selling a $150,000 house with a $1,400 a month rent, and those numbers work pretty well on a pro forma. But at the end of the day, like for me, the ones I'm more excited about are the ones that I still think have immediate runway, and I'm seeing like prices jump in certain areas. So I think some of that, and that you don't see that in a pro forma either. Yeah, so I do think that the area is important, and it's I think it's one of those top important pieces. And then the next thing I would tell you is curb appeal. I think when somebody drives up to the house, I bet you, like, they are making the decision whether or not to live in that house more often than not. Probably 60 to 70% of the time, they're making that decision before they've even gone in the house. When they go in the house, that just puts them over the edge. They're already at that 50, 60% where, yes, I like this area. Yes, I like the outside of this house. Yes, I like the way it feels when you drive up to it. I like the way the driveway sits. I like the way whatever it is. And some people, you have to understand, some people like to look like everybody else.
Sure. And
some people if normally what I have found is if you're the type of person that doesn't want to be like everybody else, then normally you're not in a subdivision. So you have to kind of Like to me, that there's a feel. If you want something a little bit different, then normally it should be out with there's like acre lots or 2 acre lots or a little bit larger lots. But if you're looking at like a quarter an acre lot, most of the time people want to live in a house that looks similar to all the rest of the houses in the area. And if you're in a D area or a C area, like you want your house to be like the nicer house on the block. And that kind of like, it's kind of like a little bit of a, even though they're not owning it, it's kind of a still pride of ownership, a pride of, rentership, so to speak, if you're buying a rental property. So those are probably the biggest things, that I would think about.
No, that's really interesting you say that. So area matters. And really, I mean, if anybody is going to go look at anything, if they're going to look to buy or rent, they're going to look at the area first. What area is it in? And so is it from an investor, whether if you've identified a market, so it kind of fits that area already, you still want to know what's going on around there. And so some of our investors have enough experience working with us that they kind of have an idea. They know the cities now. They're getting used to it. So they may ask a quick question. Hey, what's the area like? What's the block like? Whatever. But that's something you should know. You should be thinking about. And then I completely agree about the curb appeal. So you get up there and they're making their decision right away. And we have talked about that in some previous podcasts about, the kind of tenant you want is the one. Now, the most of the time, we're wanting the type of tenant that's going to pay as much as we can. And so to get that, you're going to want, I call it HGTV for renters. They don't want to live in a nicer home any less than anybody else does. So having those extra finishes, but in order to get that type of tenant, you're going to have to make the curb appeal appealing. Imagine that.
As a landlord, you want the pick. You want to be able to pick.
That's true.
Who you really want to like go through 7, 8, 9, 10 applications. You don't want to feel like you ever have to accept that first application. The people that are accepting that first application are the people that their houses are not very nice. They don't have good layouts. They don't have good curb appeal. They're not in good areas, and nobody really wants to live there. But the only reason why that they're choosing your house is because of price. And I don't really want any of my businesses to be that way. I don't want anybody to be choosing us because of price for any one of my businesses. That's not how I do business. And I think that's how I would also want to run rentals. So I think of rentals in the exact same way. Like I want the best person on that block living in my rental property.
No, that's good.
And in order to get the best person, you have to invest sometimes a little bit more, and you have to have a little bit of a better, finish and a little bit of better everything in that property. So again, I think a lot of times, when I hear people talk about turnkeys, like I hear, 3 bedroom, 1 bath, 3 bedroom, 1.5 baths, 1,000 square feet. Like I hear that. I hear like the performance side, but like there's other things that play, in my opinion, that are way more important to actually help you get that. Because it doesn't really matter if that's what the rent is. If it takes you 3 months to rent the property when it comes time to be able to rent the property. So, you really want to be able to turn these things over quickly. You want there to be a waiting list, or you want like to be able to market this and like have a renter really quick. And in order to do that, I think you have to look at those things.
Well, I think the mindset is similar to a flipper who is making their house at the price point and at the finishes and at the curb appeal where, it's going to get 20 showings in the first weekend. It's going to have multiple offers. A ton of people want to go there as opposed to the one like you're saying where you got the house sitting and the days on market are, 70, 80, 90 days. It's the same thing, same point. You want to find people who are beating down your door to live there, and you can choose the best of them, the best offer. In this case, it's the same thing for the renter. Maybe one that has the best, qualifies the best, because they're all paying basically the same price for rent. Typically, you don't take highest and best in rent, which is something to think about. But anyway, so I digress on that. But yeah, so we talked about that. We talked about area, curb appeal, but inevitably, some investors do have strategies about bed bath count. So that stuff does matter.
Kind of funny you said that, because there is a way to take highest and best if you know how to negotiate and talk to your actual tenants. But that'll be a different podcast we'll get into. But yeah, like you said, there is some validity to what other people talk about.
Yeah, so you got your typical 3-bed, 2-bath, right?
I mean, that's the best. I think the 3-bed, 2-bath is the best rental. Now, most of my personal rentals are 3-1s, so I cannot tell you that 3-1s do not rent. I can even tell you 2-1s do rent.
Yep.
Especially if they're cheap and they're condos and the numbers work. Some people and really like the 2-bedrooms from my experience don't normally get as much wear and tear, right, especially as a 4-bedroom. The bigger of the house, the more bedrooms you have, the more people you have there. Normally they're younger kids, and I'm not like just blaming kids and saying they're all just a bunch of crazies, but at the end of the day, like every kid's going to do more damage than not having the kids there. So it really depends on what you want, as far as what you're looking for. But there is some validity to square footage. I mean, not very many people can live in a 6-bedroom, or not 6-bedroom, a 600 square foot 3-bedroom house. There are some really small 3-bedrooms out there, and they don't really make a lot of sense why they built them that small. I also can think of, if I have to think off the top of my head, I'd be thinking also of, things that don't make sense. So like when you come up to a property and maybe the driveway doesn't really make sense the way it is, or even a shared driveway I think sometimes can be a negative. And I'm not saying it's not a deal as much, and there might be still some houses where there's still a good deal and there's still a house that I would buy, but I'm looking at all these factors kind of come into play. I think the biggest thing is the things that I already talked about, right, is the area. The biggest thing is the area, the layout, and I think layout is important in the house as well. I've made the mistake myself, even buying houses with just horrible layouts that there was nothing you could really do unless you wanted to spend a ton of money just, completely refiguring everything. You want to have a layout that actually works. You don't want to have to go through a bedroom to get to a bedroom. I've had houses like that before, and they just never seem to be as good as other houses. You don't really want to have to. I mean, I've actually had a house before where you had to go to the bathroom to get to the bedroom, and so like, you know what I mean? Like, layout matters in the house a lot. You want to have your property as much to a modern layout as you possibly can. And we've changed layouts throughout the years, but sometimes houses just got built horribly, and you're just like, what in the world is wrong with this? But then also the layout of the land. I think that's the other piece. Curb appeal has a little bit to do with that, but the layout of the land is also important as well. I mean, you want some normalcy. You have to be careful sometimes of like triangle lots. You have to be careful sometimes of where trees are at, even in your lots. I think but layout, I think before I even get into square footage, I think the layout is more important than even square footage or even bed bath count. Those things are important. Absolutely. Those are things that you should know. You should, because bed bath count is going to determine how much rent you can get.
Absolutely. That's
100%.
Yep.
So, those are things that you probably should be paying attention to.
When you mention layout, it's really interesting you say that, because in the end, when that person's going, in this case a tenant, they're looking at the house, they're trying to figure out a way how they're going to live there.
Right.
So they're thinking, how am I going to make this work? If your tenant is trying to figure out how they're going to live there, you've probably lost the opportunity of getting a tenant. You want to make it obvious. It's just like it's the same thing we do for when we're staging our flips. You want to make that prospective buyer, envision how it's going to look for them to live there, and it not be hard, not be difficult. Now it's interesting you mentioned, so kind of circling back on square footage and how small a house is. You have a house that's I actually have a rental that's just over 700 square feet. That's a 3-bed. So it's definitely smaller, but you also have those scenarios where you have like an 1,800 square foot 2-bed house. It's the same concept, just reverse, right? It doesn't make sense, and it's going to affect your numbers.
Kind of a waste, yes.
Yeah, it affects your numbers on. So naturally for us, we would always, and if that's the numbers, we would try to figure out a way, how do we get a 3rd bed in there? But in the end, this podcast is not telling you which one you should choose. It's that these are things that you should be thinking about for your portfolio. So you should be thinking area. You should be thinking curb appeal. You should be thinking bed bath count. What makes sense, and how. Not that getting a 2-bed 1,800 square foot house is wrong, but how does that affect you and what you want to do in your portfolio and the numbers and so on. And so another one that actually people,
or if it's 1,800 square foot, it's possible to make it into a 3-bedroom or even a 4-bedroom.
Yeah, that's normally that is something that a provider like us has already thought through, and we're probably providing something that's kind of solved that issue. But if you're looking, we see that frequently around our area. You have people who got rid of a 3rd bedroom trying to make the master larger. Those are things that happen. But another thing that people talk about are basements. So that's something you really need to think about. For us, we have had water in basements.
I have a love-hate relationship with basements.
I said the word.
And honestly, it's one of these things where you're gonna probably have less maintenance on a house that does not have a basement. I don't care where you're at. It doesn't matter where you're at, and it doesn't matter how new the house is. I know brand new houses that were built 4 years ago, and they have water in the basement right now.
Yeah.
And they were built to all the new standards and all the new, things. So it's it's definitely a love-hate thing, and the ground shifts, and you can't really control that.
Right.
And sometimes things fault out, and you can't control that. So it doesn't matter what you do to prepare. We literally had a house last year where it never had. It was over 100-year-old house. Never had water in the basement. We owned it for over a year. Never had water in the basement until 2 weeks before closing. And it's just now. On the flip side, I'm sure that there's people that are hiding the fact that there is water in the basement, and they don't want to let you know. And I get it. But I just want to let you know, you're probably going to get more for rent for a house that has a basement.
Oh yeah.
But you probably also are going to have a potential. You have the potential to have some risk there when it comes to water getting in the basement. And most of our rentals, for a rental, I rarely ever finish the basement. For a rental, occasionally we probably will when it really makes sense. But I really don't want. I want the worst thing to happen is for maybe a furnace to go out or hot water heater. I really don't think. As a rental, you really want to finish the basement just because of the risk factor that's there. Now, do I think every single basement needs to have brand new drainage put in? Probably not, but a lot of them do. So, it's something we just talked about this with 4 or 5 of our houses. We didn't realize needed to have, systems put in the basement, and we're putting them in. Because we want to try to make sure that we are providing the best we possibly can. But I've even seen those systems fail. I've seen, 4, 5, 6 years down the road, I've seen, even lifetime warranty. You try to get a company to come back, and it's they're the best company in the world, and then they're no longer in business, or who knows. But we've had a couple that have come back and done some things, but we've even had to struggle with that to a certain degree. And so just know if you have a basement, it's a love-hate relationship. And it's funny, even one of my investors that I think we manage 20 properties for, he even had water in his own personal basement, and his house, a $500,000 house. He had a massive flood one time, because it's something that can happen. You do need to know that. That it's something that can happen if you have a basement. But again, you're going to get more rent, and you need to know that as well. So garages are kind of the same thing. Although I don't really think you have the risk of a garage. I think some people that I know won't even buy a rental unless it has a garage, and I'm okay if you have that stance. I'm not personally one of those people. I have had many rentals that performed very, very well with no garages. And even though this area we have all 4 seasons, we still, it's I won't say it's normal, but I think it's normal as a rental to not have a basement. To not have a garage. So I would probably say half the rentals in Northwest Indiana don't have garages. So you just have to
that could be aggressive too.
You have to determine that for yourself as well. And the numbers a lot of the times still work very, very, really, really well without a garage. And I don't think that most people that live in this area don't think that it's necessarily 100% something they have to have in order to rent a property.
Right.
I think buying a property, it's a little bit more.
Sure.
So I'd say the people that own houses in this area is probably more 75% probably have garages. But those are 2 other things to kind of consider as well.
Yeah, I don't know in our experience how much rent really matters for a garage. You don't really see an uptick in that, so that's not something really.
You get more rent probably for a basement than you do for a garage.
And also, now the difference is different. Obviously, a garage, no garage is value. The difference between a basement and no basement's value. So a basement is technically having a basement does add more value to the property, especially long term. So if you're in an area that is
now, I will tell you where it does make a difference. It makes more of a difference with those slab houses. So if a slab house has a garage, you're probably gonna get $50 more for rent for a garage. So If it doesn't have a garage, then you're probably going to get $50 less than a garage.
Yeah. So I mean, now it's interesting because again, this particular podcast is talking about like what you want to have. So I had an investor in town that I was hosting, and he's invested around the country, and we were walking through a house that was slab. So a lot of people like slab. Why? Because they don't have to deal with the water basement issues, and it's pretty basic. But he said he likes the basement because if there's ever any plumbing repairs, you can get to it in the basement, as opposed to having a slab. Now you got to basically bust it up and get down in there. So his perspective was that's one reason he liked having basements. And when it comes to those type of repairs, now down the road, if you're in an area that is appreciating, it could open the door for, where maybe adding value, where someone would want to finish it someday. It's potential. So these are all different things you're looking at. But Tom is absolutely right. Right now, with where it's at, we generally don't finish basements for a rental, and you do get water in them. It's just it just happens. And so, but those are definitely some things. And Tom really hit on layout of the area, the obsolescences that you really want to look for. And oftentimes, like something we look for is you may have a house on a cute block, but it's like right next door to like a yard with trailers and trucks backing up, or by a train track or something like that. These different things.
That's true.
They shouldn't. It should affect the value, but you should know about it. So I mean, really, if it was right next to a train track, it's already going to be affecting the value anyway. Mm-hmm. So you would know that with your price points. I mean, we have sold properties around train tracks, and it comes down in value. So the price is still the price, but it does have an effect on a tenant. It does have an effect on that rent price, and then also on. But you should know that. You should have an idea. Well, okay, this is discounted, and the rent's discounted because it's next to a track, and so these are just things that but you should know that.
Yeah, you also want to know if there's crazy neighbors if possible, but that's kind of hard.
It is hard.
As an investor.
Then they do change so frequently.
Exactly, the other problem too. Yeah. And then if there is some really mean, nasty dog next door, that's another thing that you kind of can try to figure out. But I mean, even for us, sometimes you don't know who's going to move in next door. You don't really know if that's going to change over the course of the time as well. But definitely want to look at all those things that we've talked about today. But that's really all. I mean, is there anything else that you have?
There's a couple things we can tag. I'll just throw all of them at you, and you can run with all your might. Appreciation. That's something that you did kind of touch on that already.
Yep. Definitely want to look at that.
Taxes. Because they're you may have some municipalities, they're just known for having higher taxes than the city next door. That's a factor in where you want to invest. Just the rent overall, what direction's the rent going? Is it kind of stagnant, or are you seeing the rent going up? Because it kind of ties in with appreciation a little bit, and then also the just trends in general, what's happening. So you kind of touched on that as a whole, but
yeah. But that's really about it. I mean, again, for us, we are trying to make our properties to a higher standard and a higher level, and trying to make sure that our finishes are a little bit closer to the fix and flip finishes. Like I said, just as simple things as almost all of our houses, not all of them, but almost all of it does make sense sometimes still to do carpet.
Yep.
But for the most part, most of our houses are still vinyl plank flooring or hardwood floors. We are still doing quartz or granite countertops. Unless, again, sometimes we buy houses and we have a tenant in there and we might sell the property as is and we didn't really do anything to it. And obviously we're selling those for a lot cheaper and probably getting a $20,000, $30,000 discount off of what we're selling other properties for. And those probably don't have those things in there. But I would tell you, if you buy those properties and you want something like that, where you're picking up something that's renting for $800 a month for 30 or 40 grand, like when that tenant moves out, I'd tell you to put those things in there and to really try to add value to the property and add value to those people. Like, think about it. Like, what do you want? You probably don't want a bunch of carpet. You probably don't want, you want granite or quartz in your house, so why wouldn't somebody else? You want that extra bath. We try to add half bathrooms if we can, or add full bathrooms if we can at certain properties. And really, we're seeing rents jump way more than what we even thought that they would jump. And even a 4.2s right now in Gary we're getting over $1,000 for every single one of them, it seems like. And that didn't happen 3 or 4 years ago. Right. Those same houses 3 or 4 years ago would have been $750, $850. I think you can change a community if you'll just kind of focus on the adding the extra quality and those extra touches.
I was actually going to say the same thing. So we have the unique opportunity where we can actually set the market or move the market in appreciation in rent numbers in the trend itself. We are seeing how in particular pockets that Tom has already identified here in Gary, where a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, they were just kind of, it just was what it was for years. And now we're seeing that the rents have gone from, $795 to $995 in a matter of 2 years or less. It's incredible. And a lot of that has to do with the finishes and the changes, and people are now identifying that area.
I think what's more important of that is like we're getting better tenants.
Absolutely.
So at the end of the day, I'd rather have a really good tenant paying me $795 than a really crappy tenant paying me $995, and I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I sent out a deal yesterday to our list, and in the marketing, I put in there that a tenant is dying to pay you $1,350 for this house. And that's what that area will tell you based upon your finishes. They can't wait to pay you $1,350 for that particular house because they want to. It's a great place. And so more or less that's what you want to do when you're trying to find that place. So yeah, hopefully some of these things help you. A lot of these things were obvious. Of course, these things about, but you should have your own criteria, your own, and if you deviate from that, you should have a good reason for it. And how it makes sense. And so hopefully you guys saw some value with that. So Tom, do you have anything you want to add?
No, that's really it. I mean, at the end of the day, like for me, I'm more of a purpose-driven investor. To me, like I want to be able to make a difference. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's the only other thing I would add. Like, are you really making a difference, or are you just providing housing? Mm-hmm. To me, I think there's a difference between just providing housing mm-hmm. and actually making a difference in a community or making a difference in somebody else's life. And I mean, that's what you're doing by making a difference in the community, is you're making a difference in people's lives. Mm-hmm. And it really does matter. And to me, that's no guru is going to tell you that. Like, and for me, like that's who I am, and that's what I would do. I don't think everybody's going to be that way. I think mm-hmm. some people are just all about the almighty dollar, and mm-hmm. That's not who I am and who I want to necessarily work with all the time. I'm sure there's some people that we work with that are that way, but at the end of the day, like I really do believe that we are making a difference here in Gary, Indiana, and anywhere I invest, I would want to do the same.
I think that's really good. We actually, Tom is an owner, one of our sister companies, Good Success. He talks about all that stuff at length in several of the podcasts that they have over there. So if you would want to pick up some of their podcasts at goodsuccess.com, you can check those out. But Tom's absolutely right. That is the X factor, where after it's all said and done, everybody wants to build their portfolio. But after it's all said and done, to have the added benefit of actually providing that kind of an opportunity to people and have an impact, not only in your own life and your own family's life, which is commonly the goal, but also to have an impact in people, in your own tenants, that they had a great place, they love to stay, and change a community. That I don't know if that's something you can really put a value on when you talk about impact and influence, which in general people like to have. So I think a great podcast today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And so also, if you guys are looking to add your portfolio, we are a turnkey provider. We help people build their rental portfolios. That's what we do. So if you're interested in that, you can reach me directly at jared@byolsongroup.com. That's my email. Or you can go to our website at byolsongroup.com. And so also we have many opportunities. Tom has some ebooks that if you're interested, we can get your way. But do you have anything you want to add?
No, if you guys have enjoyed this podcast and you think this is something that has been beneficial to you, and you think maybe one of your friends may be interested in it, I would just ask you guys to share this mm-hmm. with your friends. And also, like, if you could do us a huge favor and go to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating, that would really help us out a lot.
5 stars.
5 stars.
That's right. Active Turnkey.
The best way to buy rentals.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good day.
Olson Group Network makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, Olson Group Network does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Any third-party materials or content of any third-party site referenced in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of Olson Group Network. Olsen Group Network assumes no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast or the compliance with the applicable laws of such materials and/or links referenced herein.